Good evening, and welcome to Longwood Hills Congregational Church. I am Jim Morey, the pastor, and I want to thank you for joining me on this Maundy Thursday evening for a short session where we can talk about the events of the last night of Jesus' life as he experienced it with his disciples and shared with them. These were 12 people that he had experienced a very intimate relationship in the last 3 years of his life as he ministered, as he discipled them, as he taught them. And so the events of this evening are very important. At Longwood Hills Congregational Church, we celebrate this every year. We usually meet and make it an informal worship service. We meet at 6:30 in our fellowship hall, and we have food together first, and then that is followed by a worship service or a presentation that takes us into the events of that evening to experience them ourselves in a new way and to discover a new meaning in this time that Jesus spends with his disciples. I want to invite you to join us for our Sunday morning Easter worship service this Sunday, April the 12th, and we will be worshiping live by Facebook Live at 10 a.m. And I want to thank you again for joining us this evening. Our deepest prayer and hope for all of you is that you're staying safe. We are seeing some real evidence of good things happening from our time of separation as a nation. And as difficult as it is, it seems that this is one of the most powerful ways to disrupt this virus and to move beyond it that we have, because we do not have a vaccination at this point, and there's going to be some time before we actually have one that we can use. So I want to thank you for practicing your social distancing, wearing face masks when you're out in the public and going about, and certainly as much as possible staying at home. I know that this is a challenging time. We love our families. We want to spend more time with our families. And yet we discover in this, during this time, as we basically are forced to be with our families, that there are challenges to that. And sometimes there's frustrations, and people want to get outside and move around and go about their regular activities. So my prayers are with all families as you go through these very challenging times. I want to thank you for the incredible job that you're doing as you help your children live through this. And just think about what they'll be able to tell their children and their grandchildren that they went through the pandemic of 2020 and all of the things that they had to do and practice in order to get through it. So we deeply believe that we'll get through this, come out the other side even stronger. As we come together this evening, I think this story has a lot to say to us about how we live through this experience, and not only through this experience, but beyond it as we move perhaps into a more familiar time where we can be together and do the things that we normally do. My prayer and my hope is that when we come out the other side of this, that we hold in our hearts dear some of the experiences that we have shared, some of the lessons learned about our relationships with one another, about what it means to be together, and then also what it means to move around freely, and how we shouldn't take that for granted, but we should cherish that. And focusing on the story for this evening, we're continuing our trip and walk through the Gospel of John. We've been studying Doug Padgett's book, Outdoing Jesus. And even though the title does suggest that we move beyond what Jesus did, and some people find that rather audacious to think about that we would do that, I keep reminding people, as Doug does in his book, that Jesus himself said this in the Gospel of John in the 12th chapter, where he told his disciples that they would do the same things he does, and they would do even greater things, because he is moving, because he went to the Father. And so we have received his Spirit. His Spirit is in us and with us. And as we depend on that, as we lean into his mission of love and service in this world, we discover that our reach and the reach of God's love through us is ever expansive and growing. And so we celebrate what Jesus called us to do and to be. And so from the Gospel of John in the 13th chapter, Jesus is celebrating the Passover, which is what he was doing the night before he died. And the story begins this way. It was just before the Passover feast. Jesus knew that the time had come for him to leave this world and to go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed them the full extent of his love. And I think that is an incredible phrase and sentence, where Jesus is demonstrating to his disciples just how deeply he loves them, and how deeply his love will empower them. The evening meal was being served, and the devil had already prompted Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God, and that he was returning to God. So he got up from the meal. He took off his outer clothing and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand." "No," Peter said, "you shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." "Then, Lord," Peter said, "not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." Jesus answered, "A person who has had a bath needs only to wash his feet. His whole body is clean, and you are clean, though not every one of you." For he knew who was going to betray him, and that was why he said, "Not every one of you is clean." When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and he returned to his place. "Do you understand what I have done for you?" he asked them. "You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set for you an example that you should do as I have done for you. I tell you the truth. No servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them." the power of the story is in Jesus and his example. And so to set the scene just a little bit, this is the night before Jesus dies. And this story appears only in the Gospel of John. Matthew, Mark, and Luke do not include this in their telling of the last night of Jesus' life as he celebrates Passover with his disciples. So John, it appears, really has a message in telling this particular story. There's something important for us to listen to and to study. So Jesus gets up before dinner. He walks over and he takes a pitcher and a bowl and a towel. He pours the water into the bowl, as we have here, and he goes and he washes the feet of the disciples. You can imagine that the disciples were embarrassed. Here it is, Jesus, their teacher, going and humbling himself to the point of washing their feet. They must have looked at each other very aghast, thinking, why didn't one of us go and do that? Have we been with him so long that we can't, and we have not learned yet, that Jesus has directed us and guided us to be servants? Taking that bowl and water and going and washing their feet, he goes to each one. You can imagine that as he was washing their feet, their gaze upon him, just amazed that their teacher had humbled himself. And if he would humble himself in such a way, why wouldn't they? I imagine at some point their eyes met, the disciple and Jesus. And I imagine in that gaze, no words had to be spoken. Just an incredible communication just by looking at each other. And the loving thing that Jesus did for them. He went to each one. And then he went back and he sat down and he explained what he did. You know what I did for you. Do you understand this? I think that's an incredible story for us as his followers over 2,000 years later. Do we know what Jesus has done, not only for his disciples, but for us? Can you imagine being in that room? Can you imagine Jesus washing your feet? Can you imagine the tug of your heart, knowing that as he did that, you should be doing it as well? And so he goes on further to explain that. I, your teacher, have washed your feet. Now I want you to wash each other's feet. This is the new commandment in a sense. Certainly, Jesus goes on later in this chapter to say that the new commandment is that they love each other. But part of that loving each other is serving each other. So often in our day and age, we look for service. We want to be served. We frequent businesses and restaurants and places of entertainment based upon the kind of service or the expectation of service that we desire and that we expect from them. If we receive poor service, usually that's the last time we will go there. And so we've been trained in our culture to be waited on, that we feel privileged as we move about, that other people are there to provide for us, to do for us, to serve us. And yet Jesus is telling them a real secret of life. He's telling them that the secret to life is not in waiting on others to serve you. It's not in gaining a position of status or privilege or power so that others serve you. That the real secret to life is in becoming humble, seeing other people at least on the same level as you, and humbling yourself enough to offer them some of your time, some of your gifts, to serve them in some way. Indeed, I think this is one of the reasons that God gave us marriage. That it's within that relationship where where two people come together and two people love each other, and their goal is to serve each other. Their goal is to extend themselves in serving each other. Indeed, that's the model of the Trinity. Other-centered self-giving. The Trinity, the three persons of the Trinity, pouring themselves, not expecting in return, but pouring themselves into the other in love. And in return, what is discovered is that as they're giving away, they're also receiving from the others. And that's what marriage is supposed to be between two people. An outpouring of love, putting the other person first. Other-centered self-giving. Indeed, I believe that's one of the great lessons that we can teach our children as they mature and they're part of the family. When they're young, so much focus is on them and their needs and meeting those needs. And that's what parents and adults do for children. But there comes that time when things begin to shift, where children begin to learn that to mature means not to be waited on, but it means entering into the vitality of a relationship where you're giving to other people as well. And then there's this mutual depth of relationship as parents and children give to each other and serve each other. There isn't a marriage, I think, between two people that would ever fail if the goal was always to serve the other on both parts. Families would be strong as parents teach and nurture their children in that lesson of service, so that when they go out into the world, they don't expect to receive, but they understand that they are part of a world and a relationship that's reciprocal, that they give as well. This lesson that Jesus teaches us on this Maundy, Thursday evening is the key to his self-giving on the cross tomorrow. He loved us that much. And that's where he showed the full extent of his love. That to reach us, he would demonstrate his love by giving his life in order that we might have life to the fullest, and that we would understand the power of love. I can think of no more important lesson that we can live in this particular time as we are separated from one another, as we practice social distancing. I've seen it so many times when I do venture out to the store, and I watch people help each other, extend themselves to make sure that the person's needs are cared for. If they need help, they reach out to them. And indeed, isn't that why we lift up our heroes today? And our heroes are those doctors and nurses and hospital staff who go in and take care of people who are infected with this incredible virus, and they risk their own health to do that, to serve, to be of aid to people who are just in a miserable situation. I'm so touched by the stories of nurses who will take an electronic device into a patient in the hospital, and there enable a FaceTime conversation between their loved ones outside who can't get in, to see them, to hold them, to embrace them, to tell them how much they love them. And likewise, the patient who maybe is living the final hours or days of their life, to be able to tell their family how much they love them. And it's that nurse, or it's that doctor, or it's that hospital staff who holds that electronic device and enables that communication. They are true servants. They are washing the feet of those who are ill in our society. Can we not be moved as much by that example as Jesus? Can we not be moved even more by that example, that we go out and do the same thing for other people? Of course, practicing social distancing. But there's a lot of things that we can do. Phone calls, email, extending ourselves to go and shop for someone who maybe needs to stay at home or who's elderly and can't get out. There's any number of things that we can do for others during this time that will brighten their lives so much. Indeed, that's the lesson that I think we can learn, that can live beyond this crisis and make living even more meaningful for all of us, because we follow the one who came not to serve, as he said to his disciples, but to serve. I do think that we would move beyond this time, and I think that we would make life extremely more meaningful, purposeful, and joyful for each other if we carry this lesson on as we move through this and beyond this. My prayer for you is that as you go through these next few days, that you will take time to be reflective about this story and to think about ways that you can serve others, ways that you can deepen your relationships with them, and to think about the power of Jesus' love, that tomorrow seems as if it is utterly destroyed. And the power of Jesus' love that is laid in the tomb, the power of God's love that is laid in the darkness as the stone is rolled over. And then we wait. Seemingly defeated, seemingly overwhelmed and conquered, we wait. Join us for our Easter morning worship service at 10 a.m. as we celebrate the conclusion of this story. God bless you, and keep safe. And know that Longwood Hills Congregational Church loves you and prays for you. Amen.